I stood rooted in the center of what was meant to be my sanctuary, gazing at a moss-eaten concrete slab and the blackened skeleton of a structure that had long since surrendered to the flames. $300 to my name, a single rucksack containing my entire life, and absolutely zero options left on the map. The biting Montana gale sliced through my thin university sweatshirt as if it weren't even there, bringing with it the chilling realization that I had reached the end of the line. I had hit the absolute limit, 21 years of age, and I was scraping the bottom of the barrel. But let me rewind a bit. Here is the story of how I came to be stranded in a graveyard of cinders, wondering where I might lay my head before the sun went down. They call me Caleb, and just 6 weeks prior to landing in this northern wilderness, I was walking the halls of the University of Washington as a third-year undergrad. I wasn't a prodigy, but I showed up and did the work. I performed well enough to secure a grant that took care of the bulk of my school fees. I made the honor roll on 2 separate occasions and truly convinced myself I was constructing a future that wouldn't crumble. Fate arrived on a gray Tuesday in early February, disguised as a standard white envelope stamped with the school's crest sitting innocently in my pigeonhole. It was from the bursar. I tore the flap open casually, assuming it was just standard paperwork regarding the upcoming term. Owing to necessary fiscal adjustments, we are sorry to notify you that your funding has been terminated effective as of now. I scanned the paragraph 7 separate times. I actually kept count, yet the sentences refused to register in my brain. I rang the administration immediately. Then I marched down to their offices and sat in a plastic chair for 3 hours just to get a human being in front of me. I fired off desperate messages, submitted formal petitions, and pleaded with every bureaucrat who didn't walk away. It was all for nothing. Just austerity measures, they claimed. Strictly business. A whole crowd of us were cut loose, yet it felt like a targeted strike against me. It seemed as though fate had examined the tapestry of my existence and chose to yank the single string, keeping the whole thing from unraveling. No grant meant no school fees. No fees meant I was kicked out of classes. And if I wasn't a student, I lost my bed in the residence hall. The domino effect was brutal and fast, one catastrophe tripping the next before I could even inhale. I was already grinding away at 2 gigs, putting in 20 hours, pulling espresso shots, and another 15 shelving paperbacks in the city center. I was balancing a complete academic schedule, burning the midnight oil and running purely on grit and strong coffee. But the numbers just wouldn't add up. It was a losing battle. The guy I shared a room with began eyeing me with suspicion. The sort of glance that told me he noticed I was late on the electric bill again. The look that meant he was already scouting for a new tenant. And then there were my folks. Lord, my folks. I dialed their number on a Wednesday evening, huddled on a park bench so my roommate wouldn't have to listen to me plead for salvation. It was a freezing wet Seattle night, my exhalations forming mist that vanished into the gloom. "Mother, I'm in trouble. The funding is gone, and Please." The line went dead quiet. Then came her voice, detached and calm, the specific tone she used right before letting me down. "Caleb, your dad and I have talked it over. We think it's best you navigate this on your own. It's the way we brought you up. But I'm about to be on the street. My education, my roof, it's all vanishing. Then you will find a solution. That is part of growing up." I felt a scream rising in my throat. I wanted to demand how a parent could watch their son sink and label it a life lesson. Yet I held my tongue because even at 21, a tiny fragment of my heart still wished they might show some mercy. I still clung to the delusion that the perfect phrase might finally make them care. "I'm begging you, Mom. I don't need a fortune, just help me survive the term." The pause lasted an eternity. I assumed the connection had failed. Suddenly my father spoke up, sounding rough and annoyed. "Boy, we provided the tools. If you fail, that is your burden to bear. Be a man." And the line clicked off. I remained on that cold seat for 60 minutes, observing peers stroll past, joking about parties and complaining about tests. Their worries felt microscopic against the black hole consuming my insides. That evening, a harsh truth finally settled in. Help wasn't coming. Not due to inability, but because of a deliberate choice to withhold it. Their affection was a contract with terms I could never satisfy. I was solitary in this world. Has your reality ever shattered in an instant? Have you watched the very people who were supposed to catch you step aside and let you drop? Share your experience below, because I suspect this tribe of ours is larger than any of us know. Those of us who learned through fire that blood isn't always thicker than water. But let's get back to the call that shifted my trajectory. 72 hours after being cut off, a strange number left a message on my phone. The prefix was from the Rockies, and the tone was formal, yet gentle. Mr. Caleb Mitchell, Howard Patterson here calling from the law offices in Missoula. I am reaching out concerning the inheritance left by Eleanor Henderson. Kindly return my call when you are able. Eleanor Henderson, my maternal grandmother, a ghost of a relative I recalled speaking to only a single time in my entire life. I turned 8 years old the day she finally called. Through the receiver, her voice sounded frail but gentle, promising that one day I'd see her Montana farm. Though my mother made sure that never happened. It was always too far, too costly, or we were just too busy. Eventually, I quit asking, and Eleanor faded into a stranger's name. She was a shadow from a history I was barred from knowing until 6 months ago when I heard she was gone. My mother dropped the news over dinner during winter break, casual as discussing the weather. Your grandmother died. Just thought you should be aware, she added, offering no funeral details or eulogy, just a fact served with the meatloaf before moving on. Clear's throat. Then came the call from her estate attorney. I dialed him back that evening with an inexplicable nervous flutter in my chest. Mr. Mitchell, thanks for getting back to me. I have some unexpected news, he said. Your grandmother, Eleanor Henderson, has left you as the sole heir to her property. I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me, she left me the farm. It was 40 acres near a place called Willow Creek. Lock, stock, and barrel, he confirmed. The land, the house, and everything in it. My imagination immediately conjured a rustic homestead with a wraparound porch and maybe some livestock, a sanctuary where I could catch my breath. This doesn't make sense, I stammered. Why choose me? I was practically a stranger to her. I can't speculate on her motives, Mr. Patterson replied gently, but the will is clear, you are her only grandson, and this is what she wanted. The moment we hung up, I rang my mother hoping this news might shift the dynamic between us. I foolishly thought this tangible link to her own mother might lower her defenses, but I was mistaken. That place is a money pit, Caleb, she scoffed. Barren land in the boonies, sell it fast and pay your tuition. But it's a home, I countered. Maybe I could... Could what? Play farmer. Her laugh stung worse than the insult. You would crash and burn in a month just like always. And there it was. The label my parents had assigned to me failure. In their view, I was perpetually on the brink of disaster. It's worthless dirt, she insisted, just like those fairy tales she spun nonsense from a senile old woman. Yet I clung to those tales, mere scraps of memory from that singular birthday call. I remembered Eleanor's tone, wistful and warm, describing sunsets that stained the heavens in colors unknown to city folk. She spoke of air so pure it healed you and silence deep enough to hear your own thoughts. My mother called them delusions. To me, they sounded like salvation, and with my options exhausted, that farm became my lifeline. By Sunday morning, my mind was made up. I stuffed my life into one backpack, clothes, a laptop, a few cherished books, and the $300 I had scraped together. That cash was my entire fortune, $300, and a crumpled note with a handwritten destination. Henderson Farm, rural Route 7, Willow Creek, Montana. I slipped away without a word to my parents or anyone else. Buying that Greyhound ticket felt like fleeing a burning building, a quiet admission of defeat. Yet it was the first honest decision I had made in years, not for my parents, not for school, but for myself. I boarded at 6 o'clock in the morning, took a window seat, and watched the Seattle skyline fade into the past. The journey stretched on for 17 hours, a slow metamorphosis of the world outside the glass. Concrete jungles dissolved into suburbs, then small towns until thick timber swallowed the highway and snow-capped peaks pierced the horizon. With every mile marker passed, the crushing weight of my old existence seemed to lighten. The stress of stagnation vanished only to be replaced by a new, gnawing uncertainty. What was I walking into? I was green as grass with no plan and no clue about the state of the homestead. The lawyer had warned me the place sat empty for 15 years after Eleanor moved to care. 15 years of rot and weather. I shoved the fear down and fixated on the reality I had no safety net, so I had to make this work. Survival was the only option. If you're listening, let me ask, have you ever jumped without knowing where you'd land? Have you ever packed a bag and left because staying put meant losing your soul? Share your story below. Your bravery might be the lifeline someone else needs right now. Here is the truth of my arrival in Willow Creek. The station was just a lonely bench outside a gas station on the highway. The driver shouted the town name. I shouldered my pack and stepped onto the dusty shoulder, standing alone as the bus roared away, leaving me to the silence. The welcome board claimed a population of 843 souls. It was a single-strip town lined with structures that seemed to have sprouted from the earth alongside the first trees. I stood on the pavement shivering in a university pullover and denim that was distressed by design, though now it just looked threadbare and inadequate. My running shoes were dissolving at the seams. Every possession I had to my name was stuffed inside the canvas bag on my shoulders. I must have stuck out like a sore thumb, a lost urban stray without a clue. The local service station appeared to be the town's beating heart, handling mail, groceries, and gossip all at once. Through the glass, I made out a huddle of figures gripping mugs of steaming brew. My destination was rural Route 7. Scanning the vacant road devoid of any cabs or ride-sharing apps, the reality of the distance sank in. We were a long way from Seattle. This was the deep backwoods of Montana, a place where mobility meant having an engine. I steeled myself and pushed through the door, killing every conversation instantly. 5 strangers pivoted to inspect the intruder, cataloging my flimsy attire and obvious lack of belonging. I felt like an astronaut on the wrong planet. The gentleman manning the register, a man likely in his 60s with a face mapped by the sun and eyes full of grace, offered a tentative grin. His badge identified him as Earl. "Can I do something for you, son?" "I'm looking for the way to Henderson Farm out on rural Route 7. I was hoping for a pointer. The atmosphere in the shop pivoted. The wary quiet softened into curiosity. "Henderson Place?" Earl's brow hiked up. "You kin. Eleanor Henderson was my grandmother. She willed the land to me." The patrons exchanged silent signals. A lady by the brew station lowered her mug. An elder wearing a seed cap leaned in. "Well, I'll be," Earl murmured, savoring the realization. "Eleanor's boy. She spoke of you often, mentioned you were out in Seattle. Always prayed you'd find your way back here." The statement landed with the weight of a stone. She had spoken of me. She had waited. Despite the wedge my mother drove between us, Eleanor had kept the candle burning. "I never made it," I whispered. "Not while she was still with us." Earl dipped his head, eyes soft with empathy. "Eleanor was the salt of the earth. Made apple butter that'd make you cry. Most of us in here represent a debt of kindness she never called in." The bell chimed behind me as a new arrival bustled in. She looked to be in her 50s, sporting a flour-dusted smock, and steel-gray hair knotted strictly for utility. She halted the moment she saw me. "You're the Henderson boy." "Caleb. Name's Mabel. I run the eatery across the way." Her gaze was piercing, but not unkind. "Does a soul know you've arrived? Did they brief you on the homestead?" "Just the legal notice that it's mine." Mabel and Earl shared a heavy glance. It was the specific gravity that settles between decent folks when a hard truth needs telling. "Sweetheart," Mabel said, "Boys, droppings and take a load off. We need to talk." She guided me over to her establishment, a cozy spot featuring crimson booths and the eternal aroma of roasted beans. She ushered me into a seat, slid a mug my way, and parked herself opposite. "When did your people last set foot on that land?" "Never, I think." Mabel let out a long breath. "That makes sense then, Caleb. The homestead isn't there. The fire took it 12 years back, right after Eleanor went into care." The floor seemed to pitch sideways. I clutched the laminate edge. "Excuse me. It was an electrical spark or so, they reckon. By the time the volunteers got the truck out there, it was just embers. The paperwork mentioned buildings. The barn survived. That old red beast needs love, but the bones are good. There's a pump out back that likely still draws water, but the main house, child, that's been dust for a long time." I remained frozen, the dark liquid in my cup losing its heat, struggling to comprehend the news. In my head, I'd pictured a fixer-upper, dusty, maybe peeling paint, but a shelter nonetheless. 4 walls, a sanctuary. Instead, I had empty space. "The earth itself is rich," Mabel pressed on. 40 acres of prime Montana ground. Eleanor's apple trees are still standing wild now, but breathing. It has value. It's simply not the sanctuary you were counting on. My mind raced to the $300 tucked in my denim, the bus that had already departed, and the parents who had cut ties. "I don't have a plan B." Mabel reached out, wrapping her callus-hardened hand over my trembling one. Her grip was warm and grounding. "Then we make a plan. That's how we survive out here. Can you fathom traveling 17 hours on a prayer only to find your salvation was a pile of soot? If you have ever felt the foundation of your life dissolve, you understand the hollow ache in my chest. Drop your story below. Sometimes hearing that another soul walked through the fire helps us stand up again. Earl ferried me out in his battered truck. It was a 30-minute trek down a gravel track so reclaimed by nature we nearly drove past it. He steered through craters and debris while I felt my optimism bleed out with every jolt of the suspension. The vehicle broke through a canopy of green into an open space and Earl killed the engine. "This is the place." I climbed down to inspect my legacy. Where a home should have stood, only a scar remained. A cracked slab of concrete claimed by moss with blackened timbers jutting up like the ribs of some great fallen beast. Nature had reclaimed the wreckage, draping the decay in a blanket of wildflowers and waist-high grass until it looked almost deliberate. Mabel's barn stood in the distance like a tired sentry, a massive red beast stripped by the weather listing to the side but refusing to fall. Past the barn, the property rolled out endlessly, a tangle of overgrown weeds hiding the apple trees Eleanor had spent 40 years nursing. You could hear a pin drop if it weren't for the breeze rustling the stalks and the faint murmur of the creek. No city hum, no sirens, just peace. Earl squeezed my shoulder, his voice gentle. "Look, son, you don't have to prove anything. Hop in the truck, let's get you back to civilization. We can find another way." I just shook my head. I didn't have the words for it, but standing in that wreckage, a strange sensation hit me, something totally foreign. It was hope, and not the sunny kind because my life was definitely a mess. It was the realization that I'd hit the floor, and it was solid concrete. I couldn't sink any lower. There was nowhere to go but up. "I'm sticking around," I rasped out. "Just for the night anyway." Earl wouldn't leave until I saved his number, making me swear I'd ring him if trouble started. Dust kicked up as he drove off, leaving me stranded in this legacy of mine. That's when the quiet really settled in. I was a creature of the city, used to constant chaos. Out here, the stillness was so heavy it felt unnerving. But then the layers peeled back. I caught the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, birds calling out, and the steady rhythm of water flowing nearby. Hitching my pack higher, I started the trek toward the old red building. Up close, the place was massive, 60 feet by 30, crowned by a roof that looked tired and sagging. The red paint was barely a memory, and daylight poked through the slats, but the bones felt strong. The main door wouldn't budge. I fought with it until I squeezed through. Inside it smelled like old earth, lit only by thin beams of sun cutting through the wall cracks. Rusty tools lined the walls like skeletons. Corners were piled with rotted hay, and a dead tractor sat silent. Way in the back, I spotted a ladder going up. I took it slow, checking every step before putting my full weight on the rungs. The space up top was huge, with plenty of headroom and floorboards that felt sturdy enough to hold me. Mice had definitely nested in the scattered blankets, but the roof held against the damp. It wasn't a palace, but it was a roof over my head. This was it. I spent the rest of the day battling the dust, reclaiming the space, and salvaging what bedding I could. Luck was on my side. I dug up a kerosene lamp that still had some juice in the tank. But the real treasure was in a crate by the ladder, something that shifted my whole world. A beat-up leather diary. One look at the script inside, and I knew it matched the only birthday card I'd kept all these years. It was Eleanor's, my grandmother's words. My hands were trembling as I flipped through. She chronicled everything, the seasons, the sweat falling for Grandpa, and carving a life out of this dirt. It was the pages from the end that really tore me up. Once Grandpa passed and the kids bailed, she wrote about the silence. She felt like the last watchman protecting a treasure nobody else wanted. Then I saw my name. "Caleb is on my mind again," she wrote. "My daughter's boy. I keep reaching out, but the letters return and the phone just rings. I don't know why she's blocked me, but I pray Caleb knows he wasn't forgotten. I always hoped he'd end up here. If any of my kin return, I want them to see the true value of this place. It's not about the sweat or being alone. It's the freedom, the grounding, the power to make a life yourself. This soil fed my soul. If I could leave one thing to my grandkids, it's the guts to walk a different road. To be brave enough to reset. To know you can build beauty from scratch if you just put in the work." I curled up in the dust, hugged that book tight, and just broke down. Tears for a woman I missed out on. For the time my mother's bitterness stole. For an old soul who died waiting for a visitor who never showed. And for me, the guy who showed up empty-handed only to find out he'd been loved the whole time by a stranger. You ever find an object left behind by the dead? That felt like a direct line to you. A note, a snapshot, a diary. It feels like magic, doesn't it? Love, cheating, death. If you've got a story like that, drop it below. That stuff matters. Anyway, that first night was endless. When the sun dipped, true black took over. No street lamps, no porch lights, just a void. My lamp was a pinprick of fire in the dark. The silence made everything louder, wood groaning, claws scratching, and owl hunting. I bundled up in the moth-eaten covers, rested my head on my bag, and stared up at the rafters waiting for sleep. My mobile was a useless brick, not a single bar of service to be found. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket of isolation I'd never felt before. It chilled me to the bone. I couldn't help but picture my parents safe in their suburbia, or my old roommate filling my empty spot while my entire existence had crumbled in a matter of days. My mind drifted to Eleonora, who had weathered decades of solitude on this very soil, staring down the darkness and refusing to break. Clutching her diary to my chest like a shield, I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. Dawn brought a complete transformation. I opened my eyes to a skyline on fire with color. The heavens were painted in strokes of violent violet and burning gold, while the breeze carried the scent of damp soil and waking life. I scrambled down from the loft. In the harsh light of day, the homestead didn't look dead anymore, just dormant. Traces of the past were visible now, stone outlines and rotted posts marking where lush gardens once thrived. Ancient fruit trees stood their ground, twisted but resilient, and the murmur of running water led me to a pristine stream cutting through the rear boundary. I cupped my hands and guzzled the freezing liquid until my belly ached. It was glacial pure and tasted like salvation. Standing up, I really looked at my inheritance for the first time. 40 acres of potential. A weathered barn, a slumbering orchard, a flowing brook, and a grandmother's spirit guiding me through ink and paper. I had shown up with nothing but the clothes on my back and a backpack containing $300. I came looking for a sanctuary and found a wreck. But as the sun hit my face, something clicked. I wasn't running away anymore. I was digging in. I vowed to restore this place for her memory, for my own sanity, and for every underdog who was ever betting against. I'd show them all. That marks the end of Chapter 1. But the real struggle was only starting. I was broke, clueless, and flying blind. All I had was 40 acres of wilderness and a book full of dreams. Coming up, I'll share how strangers became family. We'll uncover the mysteries buried in the timber frame and face the adversary who tried to strip it all away. If you're rooting for this survival story, hit that subscribe button to follow the journey. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes? Did you find light in the darkness? Drop a comment below. Your experience might be the lifeline someone else needs to read. Thanks for watching. See you in the next installment. Day 2 started with a hollow stomach. I'd finished my last ration of dried food the previous evening, lying to myself that I'd forage something by sunrise. But reality hit hard. I was stranded on 40 acres with no pantry, no vehicle, and no help within shouting distance. Willow Creek was 8 miles out. That's what the old man Earl had mentioned. 8 miles of gravel and asphalt. I laced up my boots as the sun breached the horizon. The air was biting, turning my breath into mist, but the rhythm of the march got my blood pumping. I trudged down the overgrown lane to the county road, taking in the Montana sprawl, cattle on the hills, endless fencing and snow-dusted peaks watching over it all. 3 hours of marching later, famished and footsore, the small cluster of buildings known as Willow Creek finally emerged. Mabel was already on the porch of her diner, arms crossed, eyeing me like she knew I was coming. "Get in here, I'm feeding you." I tried to decline, mumbling about being broke, but she silenced me with a sharp look. "Nobody mentioned a bill. Sit." She whipped up a feast, eggs, rashers of bacon-buttered toast, and coffee that was basically rocket fuel. I devoured it with the ferocity of a starving animal. Once the plate was clean, Mabel took a seat opposite me, her expression serious. "All right, spill it. What's the plan?" So I laid it all out. The lost scholarship, the family drama, the inheritance that was just a burnt shell, and the journal that convinced me to stay despite having zero survival skills. She absorbed every word, stoic and silent. When I fell silent, she paused. "Your grandma was dear to me, one of the finest souls to walk this earth. She never stopped talking about you, kept a framed photo of you by her bed even if it was a decade out of date. That hit me. She had kept my picture close while I assumed I was forgotten. Eleonora was waiting for you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I just wish I'd met her. "You meet her by working her dirt, by finishing what she started." Mabel leaned in. "I'm going to give you a hand, Caleb. Not out of pity, but because she would have expected it of me, and because you've got a look in your eye that's just like hers." "What look is that?" "Mule-headedness, the good sort, the kind that refuses to stay down." She hired me on the spot. Dish duty and busboy work 3 days a week. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. $70 a day, cash in hand. She warned me the hike was brutal, but figured my youth would carry me through. I didn't even let her finish the sentence before saying yes. It wasn't dignity holding me back anyway. I'd run out of that long ago. I was just floored that a total stranger, someone who didn't owe me a thing, was handing me a lifeline. That was lesson number 1 about this town. Folks here looked out for one another. It wasn't transactional. Nobody kept a scorecard. It was just the way the community breathed. Out here, where civilization is a half-day drive and the cold can freeze the life out of you, looking out for your neighbor is the only way anyone makes it through. That afternoon, I hoofed it back to the property, my arms heavy with goods from the general store. A loaf, a jar of peanut butter, tins of beans, a box of matches, and a heavy-duty torch. Earl tried to wave off half the bill, but I emptied my pockets to pay him every cent. I needed to, but he did force one gift on me that I couldn't turn down. Wisdom. He told me to look for an iron pump near the old stone well. It had been sitting idle for ages, he said, but the source was deep and clean. If I could coax that mechanism back to life, I wouldn't go thirsty. That's step 1, he insisted. Hydration first, then a roof, then a belly full of food. Tackle it by inches, just by inches. I chanted that mantra the whole hike back. Come sunrise, I located the spot 50 yards out from the charred ruins, half swallowed by brambles. The iron handle was seized up with rust, stubborn as a mule. I threw my entire body weight against the lever again and again until finally the earth gave a deep groan. There was a wet gurgle, then a sudden gasp of air from the pipe. Liquid spewed out thick and muddy like chocolate milk. I didn't stop, though. I pumped until my shoulders screamed, watching the flow slowly turn translucent. An hour in it was running distinct and icy clear. I collapsed in the muck right there and just howled with laughter. It was the first real joy I'd felt in months. Baby steps. The thirst was handled. Now I needed to figure out where to sleep without freezing. The hayloft kept the rain off, but it wasn't a long-term fix. Spring nights were mild, but I knew the coming frost would turn that barn into a tomb. I required a fortress, so I decided to toss the place for anything useful. I dedicated an entire sunrise to sunset, combing through the debris stalls and dark corners. Mostly it was trash-corroded wrenches fraying twine the carcass of a tractor, but way in the rear, concealed beneath a canvas sheet I'd mistaken for a rubbish pile, lay something that made my breath catch. It was a camper vintage 1980s by the look of the curves and the oxidizing cream coat caked in decades of barn grime. I froze, terrified that if I got my hopes up it would just be a hollow shell. I yanked the cover off and tried the side entry. The weather stripping had fused shut, but a hard shove popped it open. Under the dust lay a miracle. A fully intact micro-home. There was a galley with a propane range, a basin sink waiting for a hookup. A booth that converted to a sleeper, and tucked in the back a lavatory with a chemical toilet and a shower stall tight enough to induce claustrophobia. The fabric smelled ancient, and rodents had definitely nested in the foam, but the bones were good. Every essential piece was present. It was salvageable. I sank onto the gritty bench and buried my face in my palms. Eleanor hadn't just bequeathed me a plot of dirt. She'd given me the tools to stay alive. The diary for wisdom, the aquifer for life, and this shelter tucked away like an Easter egg for anyone desperate enough to hunt for it. I sent a silent prayer of thanks to her spirit. Then I spent 7 straight days scouring that rig until my hands were raw. I washed every inch with well water and shreds of old quilts, dragging the cushions out to bake and sanitize in the daylight. I polished the glass until it caught the light and traced every wire and hose to check for rot. The gas cylinders were dry, but the lines held pressure. The reservoir was sound. The head needed chemicals, but the flush lever snapped cleanly. Once I sourced some fuel, the burner roared to life immediately. Eventually, Earl brought a local grower named Harlan over to help me shift the beast. We burned daylight wrestling it out of the barn, parking it flat near the water source. Harlan was 50-something with skin like cured leather from a lifetime in the fields. He showed me the trick to leveling the chassis on blocks and running a simple hose from the pump. I was still hauling buckets by hand, though. Dealing with the waste tank was a chore, and my only light came from burning kerosene and batteries. Yet I could lock the world out. I had a dry mattress. I had a sanctuary against the storms. It was mine. You know that feeling when a tiny victory shifts your entire universe. When a small discovery feels like winning the lottery. It's proof that despair isn't the only option. That the sun can still break through even when you've resigned yourself to the dark. If you've ever found light in a dark place, tell me below. We all need a reminder that miracles aren't extinct. The next month was a brutal, beautiful blur. I found my groove. Awake at dawn, hackings back the overgrowth, mending broken rails, mastering tools I'd previously only seen in magazines. Thrice weekly, I'd trek to town to wait tables at Mabel's, and every night ended the same way by the glow of a lantern reading Eleanor's words. Mabel stepped into the empty space my mother left behind, feeding me hot meals and waving away my crumpled bills whenever I tried to pay. She taught me the rhythm of cooking on a propane burner and the lost art of preserving food without a fridge. Earl became my lifeline, not just a supplier. He let me put groceries on a tab when I was broke, doing it with a quiet dignity that never made me feel small. He filled the silence with stories of Eleanor and the farm's golden years while Harlan took on the role of my mentor. On his days off, he'd drive out to show me the ropes. He taught me to read the dirt like a book, to lay out a garden bed, and to work in harmony with the soil rather than fighting it. "Your grandmother knew every inch of this dirt," he told me one afternoon. "Woman could make a fence post sprout leaves. Folks drove in from 3 counties just for her produce, her canning, her apple butter. You want to save this place, you learn what she knew." "How?" I asked. "Read her journals. Watch. Listen. Sweat. Farming doesn't have shortcuts, son. It is just showing up day after day. But you treat the land right and it will give you back everything you pour into it." I took his words to heart, studying Eleanor's handwriting like scripture, scribbling notes on planting cycles, crop rotation, and which plants grew best together. I learned the chemistry of compost, building a heap behind the barn, and figured out how to handle pests without drenching the earth in poison. Eventually, I broke ground on my first patch, a small 20 by 20 foot plot, in a spot Eleanor had praised for its rich soil and heavy sun. It was her haven for tomatoes. I turned that earth by hand, driving a rusted shovel from the barn into the ground and working in compost until my back felt like it was on fire. I planted seeds I'd bought with my tips from the diner. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, snap, beans, squash, and a handful of herbs. I watered them faithfully, hauling buckets until I'd worn a path through the grass between the pump and the garden. The morning, I saw green shoots piercing the dirt, and emotion hit me that I couldn't place. It might have been pride or hope, or just the deep, quiet satisfaction of bringing life into the world with my own 2 hands. Then came the livestock. Virgil, an old-timer I met through Harlan, sold me 4 laying hens for $30. He was in his mid-60s, retired from the heavy work, but unable to give up his birds entirely. When I told him what I was trying to do at the Henderson place, the lines in his face softened into a smile. Eleanor would be tickled pink. She always said that land needed young blood to wake it up. He helped me frame up a coop using scrap lumber and wire I got from Earl. He taught me how to look after the flock, how to gather eggs without a fuss, and how to fortify the coop against foxes and raccoons. I named them Henrietta, Beatrice, Clementine, and Dorothy, names I found in the journals, the same ones Eleanor had given her hens 40 years ago. When they started laying, it felt like hitting a jackpot. Fresh eggs every single morning. I even had enough surplus to sell a few cartons at the diner. Those small wins were the fuel that kept me moving. The first red tomato, the first jar of pickles made Eleanor's way. The first night I went to bed with a full stomach. Every milestone whispered that I was actually getting somewhere. Even when the days dragged, I felt movement. But just as I started to believe this life might stick, the real world came crashing in. I remember it clearly. A Tuesday in early June, sky blue and warm. I was weeding when the sound of an engine cut through the quiet, not the rattle of Earl's truck or Harlan's pickup. This was a purr, smooth, expensive. A black BMW rolled into view, looking aggressively out of place against the tall grass and peeling paint. It parked by the trailer, and a man got out. He looked to be late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing an outfit that cost more than my entire life. A tailored vest, dress shoes that had never seen mud, and a watch that caught the sun and blinded you with the glare. He surveyed the property with a look of polite horror, then spotted me and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You must be Caleb. I'm Daniel. Daniel Mitchell, your cousin." "Didn't know I had one," I said. "My father is Robert Mitchell, your mother's brother. That makes us family." He said the word like it was a bone stuck in his throat. "I am here about the property." I stabbed my trowel into the dirt and stood up. "What about it? It should have been split among the family, not handed over to you alone." His grin widened, but his eyes remained dead. "There are serious questions regarding the validity of the will. Concerns that Eleanor wasn't in her right mind when she signed those papers. The accusation felt like a physical blow. She was my grandmother. She wanted me to have this land. The will is clear. Wills are just paper. Whether a judge respects them is a different story. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. I am offering you an out. Sign this, take $50,000, walk away free and clear. No lawyers, no court dates, no years of misery. $50,000, it was a fortune. Enough to restart my life anywhere I wanted. But this farm, this was mine. Eleanor gave it to me. Not to Daniel, not to my mother, to me. Why now? I asked. Where were you 3 months ago? His smile faltered for a second. I didn't know you existed. None of us did. My father assumed the title would revert to him until we discovered she'd left it all to some college dropout. Naturally, there were concerns. Concerns about what? About the future of this asset, about its true value, about ensuring it doesn't get wasted. Then it clicked. You want to flip it, I said. The land is valuable, Caleb, extremely valuable. A developer is eyeing this whole valley for a luxury resort and vacation rentals. He scanned the horizon, calculating. 40 acres like this, you're sitting on $500,000, maybe more. $500,000. That was his price tag for the soil Eleanor had bled into the dirt that fed us and kept the livestock alive. Her sanctuary, the legacy she asked me to guard. Not happening, I told him. His smirk evaporated. Use your head. You're broke, green, and alone. You'll crash and burn here same as you do with everything else. Grab the $50,000 while you can. No. The silence stretched between us. Daniel creased the paper and tucked it into his jacket. Big mistake. I'll challenge the will drag you through every courtroom in the state until you're left with zero land and zero cash. You'll be destitute. He headed for his vehicle, pausing with one hand on the doorframe. Don't forget the tax bill, $2,000 due in 90 days. Miss that, and the county puts this place on the auction block. The ice returned to his grin. And I'll be the first bidder. The luxury car peeled out, churning up a cloud of grit that lingered in the air. I remained rooted in the driveway long after he was gone, pulse-hammering fingers trembling. 3 months, $2,000. My savings sat at roughly $400. Nowhere near enough. Everything I'd cultivated was at risk of vanishing in a single season. Put yourself in my boots. A stranger claiming to be family arrives demanding half your inheritance, weaponizing the legal system. He tears open old family secrets and gives you a 90-day deadline to scrape together $2,000 or face eviction. Do you fold, sign the rights away, or dig in your heels? Hit that subscribe button and let me know your move because my mind was already made up. The events that followed shifted my entire reality. That evening, I hunkered down in the camper with Eleanor's diary hunting for a lifeline. She wasn't a stranger to struggle. She'd weathered dry spells, deluges, livestock disease, and harvests that never came. Losing my grandfather left her solitary for nearly 20 years. Yet, she endured. She never abandoned this soil. Beauty can grow from nothing, she'd scrawled, if you have the will. My mission was clear, earn $2,000 in 90 days using nothing but a patch of vegetables, a few birds, and untamed earth. Buried at the back of the notebook, I struck gold. Eleanor's formula for apple butter. The same preserve folks used to travel 50 miles just to taste. The recipe that put Henderson Farm on the map. Beyond the window, wild and neglected, stood the very trees that bore those apples. At first light, I hiked the 2 miles to Virgil's place. I relayed the details of Daniel's ultimatum. Virgil's leathery features tightened into a scowl. Daniel Mitchell. His dad Robert came sniffing around years back right after Eleanor entered care. Pushed her to sign away the deed. She shut him down. You know why? She said this earth belonged to true kinfolks who cherished it. Virgil met my gaze. Reckon she was talking about you. We trekked out to the grove, maybe 30 trees, ancient and twisted limbs splayed like gnarled hands. Yet life persisted. Fresh green shoots and the tiny stone-hard beginnings of a harvest dotted the wood. Wealthy and Harrelson varieties, Virgil noted fingering a twig, real heirlooms. Commercial growers don't bother with them now, but the taste... He chuckled softly. Unmatched. These trees were the secret behind your grandma's fame. If we prune them, water them, really tend to them. They've got another 30 years in them. Eleanor put them in the ground as a girl, poured her soul into the roots. He eyed me skeptically. The issue is the clock. Fruit won't drop until late August. You need cash by the start of September. 90 days. A late August harvest left zero margin for error. What are my options? I need $2,000. The veggie patch is tiny. I've only got 4 hens. Virgil paused. Well, the town market kicks off in May, goes till October. Folks drive in every Saturday for local goods. If you ramp up the garden and get those birds laying, you could generate cash flow early. The market. I recalled Mabel talking about it. I'll lend a hand with the orchard, Virgil added. I can teach you the pruning and maintenance. Plus Mabel has a certified kitchen. She might let you process the butter there. The puzzle pieces began to lock into place. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a path. Why do this? I asked. You barely know me. A gentle smile broke across Virgil's face. Your grandma saved my hide once. Decades back when I was young, reckless, and facing foreclosure, she floated me a loan. No interest, no interrogation. She just told me to pass the kindness along. He gripped my shoulder. This is me squaring that debt. That's the way we survive out here. We dedicated the rest of the day to the trees. Virgil showed me how to spot deadwood, train the limbs for yield, and identify sickness. By sundown, my palms were raw and blistered, but the pain didn't register. Each trimmed limb felt like a down payment on my future. The weeks dissolved into labor. I doubled the garden's footprint, constructed another coop, and acquired 6 more layers, bumping the flock to 10. I mastered pickling and canning in Mabel's workspace. Mid-May arrived and the market gate swung open. I arrived with nothing but a rickety folding table. I'd borrowed a sign I'd lettered by hand that said Henderson Heritage Farm and a meagers. Just some spring greens, a handful of radishes, 24 eggs, and a couple of mason jars filled with pickles. The table was bare within 3 hours, netting me maybe $60, but the money didn't matter as much as the validation. It confirmed that folks around here still respected my family's legacy. I returned the following week with a heavier load, and as the season deepened, the soil truly began to provide. Vines heavy with tomatoes, crisp peppers, summer squash beans, cukes, and bundles of fresh herbs. Soon enough, the locals were looking for me specifically. Where's that Henderson kid hearing that gave me a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years, yet my pockets weren't full enough? When July faded, I had tucked away $800. The tax bill was due in 6 weeks, and I was still $1,200 shy. The fate of the farm rested entirely on the orchard. I monitored the branches like a hawk, inspecting the fruit, daily gauging their size, and silently begging the sky to be kind. Through the heat of late summer, the fruit fattened up, shifting from pale green to deep crimsons and golden hues. When the final week of August hit, so did the harvest, and Virgil showed up to lend a hand. Harlan Earl and even Mabel, who actually shut down her restaurant early, joined the line. We labored from dawn until dusk, hauling bushels to the barn and grading the fruit. We ended up with hundreds of pounds of old-world varietals, a yield far beyond my wildest expectations. Now comes the real work, Mabel announced, telling me we had to transform the raw fruit into a cash crop. We spent a fortnight in her kitchen, adhering strictly to Eleanor's original instructions. The fruit simmered gently for hours, mingling with cinnamon and cloves until it reduced into a dark, velvety spread. I poured the mixture into glass containers, sealed the lids tight, and affixed a handwritten label to each one. Henderson Heritage Farm. Apple butter. On the opening Saturday of September, I expanded to 3 tables, building pyramids of jars alongside dried chips and fresh fruit, all under my new banner. The sign announced Eleanor Henderson's famous apple butter, boasting a family tradition dating back to 1962. My stomach was in knots, making it impossible to eat a bite, but the crowd surged in. The elders arrived first, drawn by the memory of Eleanor. Then came the younger parents who had only heard the rumors. One taste of the sample was all it took to widen their eyes in delight. Stock disappeared rapidly, with customers grabbing 3 units at a clip while sharing fond recollections of visiting this land when they were kids. She'd be beaming right now, an older lady whispered, squeezing a $20 bill into my palm and waving away the change. Within 2 hours, everything was gone, every jar sack and loose apple. Back home, my hands trembled as I tallied the cash. I cleared over $800 in a single afternoon. I doubled the inventory for the following weekend and cleaned up again, repeating the success the week after that. When September closed out, the tax money was sitting in my pocket with room to spare. I strode into the government office with a stack of bills and a grin plastered across my face. "Paying off the Henderson lien," I said. The clerk verified the amount, stamped the document with a heavy thud, and slid it back to me. "You're clear until next year," she noted. I stood outside on the pavement, clutching that piece of paper, reading the confirmation repeatedly. Paid in full. The soil beneath my feet officially belonged to me. My mind drifted to Daniel and his intimidation tactics. I pictured his luxury vehicle, the tailored suit, that icy smirk. He gave me 90 days to crash and burn, but I'd risen from the ashes. Still, I knew he wouldn't just walk away. Men like him don't know how to lose. He'd return, armed with attorneys and court filings. The war was far from done. We were only in the first round, but I was prepared because the last 3 months taught me a lesson Daniel could never grasp. Solitude was a myth. I was surrounded by neighbors who had faith in my mission friends who appeared exactly when the weight became too heavy. I carried the legacy of a grandmother who loved me before I even knew her name. My roots were finally struck digging deep into this Montana earth, and I refused to be moved. That brings us to the close of this chapter. Yet the true test lay on the horizon, a winter season that would bring me to my knees. A revelation that shifted my entire perspective, leading to a final standoff with Daniel to decide who would keep the land. If this journey resonates with you, please hit subscribe and stick around for the next installment. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Have you ever pulled off a victory when the odds were stacked against you, or discovered a reservoir of grit you didn't know existed? I'd love to read your experiences. They truly mean a lot. Thanks for accompanying me on this path. I'll catch you in part 3. Winter arrived in Montana like a wolf circling a wounded animal. The locals had tried to warn me. Earl mentioned it. Harlan emphasized it. Even Mabel, usually the stoic type, took me aside back in October to tell me to batten down the hatches. I honestly believed I was prepared. I'd stacked cord after cord of timber against the barn wall until the woodpile towered over my head. I secured backup propane cylinders for the trailer's furnace and filled the pantry shelves with enough canned goods and preserves to feed an army. I lined the chicken coop with heavy bales of hay and relocated the flock to the barn's most sheltered nook. But no amount of planning could match the brutality of the real thing. The initial flakes fell in early November, a soft powder that turned the property into a scenic holiday card, beautiful and seemingly benign. The real storm hit 7 days later, dumping 2 feet of powder in a single day and rendering the driveway completely useless. I was cut off from the world for 3 days before Earl punched through the drifts in his truck to drop off gear and ensure I hadn't frozen to death. Come December, the mercury plunged to 10 below, then 20 below. Then came a night burned into my memory where it bottomed out at 35 degrees below zero. The frost felt alive, a malevolent force seeking out every fissure, every draft, and every vulnerability in my shelter. The propane heater hissed non-stop, burning through my reserves way faster than I had calculated. Even buried under 3 layers of clothes sleep was a battle. I had to cuddle with my water bottles inside the sleeping bag just to keep them liquid. But the frost still bit through. Eventually, I stopped trekking into town for my diner shifts. The hike was just too risky. Mabel didn't hold it against me, though. She told me to hunker down, stay alive, and she'd see me when the spring thaw came. Time lost its shape. Up before the sun. Make sure the heat was on. Count the hens. Fight with the water pump before the ice seized it for good. Dragging logs, scraping together a meal, and reading Eleanor's old diary by the glow of a lantern. Rinse and repeat. Honestly, the freezing temps hurt less than the isolation. Entire weeks evaporated without a single soul crossing my path, the only sound being my own voice muttering in the empty room. That quiet, which felt like a blessing back in July, turned into a heavy weight on my chest. I started chatting with the hens just to break the suffocating stillness. Other times I would speak to Eleanor, pretending she was listening from somewhere inside those worn pages. A dark thought crept in: if I vanished, would the world even blink? It makes you ask if you have ever really experienced true solitude. I don't mean just sitting in a room by yourself for a few hours. I mean being severed from the rest of humanity. That kind of empty space rewires your brain. It peels back every layer of distraction until all that is left is you. Some folks discover a steel core in that silence. Others just crumble. That winter, I think I touched both extremes. The breaking point hit around the middle of January, riding in on a blizzard that had been brewing for days. The clouds took on that bruised leaden look that screams danger. I scrambled to get everything ready. I stacked firewood to the ceiling, topped off the water jugs, and tucked the birds in tight with thick straw and a warming bulb running off a generator Harlan had loaned me. Hell arrived at midnight sharp. The sound of that gale was something else entirely. It shrieked against the metal siding, threatening to tear the place apart. The whiteout was so dense the barn just vanished from view. The mercury plummeted 25 below, then 30, then 35. Around 2 in the morning, the heater sputtered a couple of times and gave up the ghost. I went into panic mode. Tightened the hoses, wiped the intakes, clicked the igniter until my thumb was raw. No dice. A part deep inside the mechanism had snapped or frozen something way beyond my skill set to repair. The warmth vanished instantly. I could physically feel the freeze invading the room, claiming it corner by corner. Every exhale turned into white mist and ice crystals started blooming on the glass. Staying put was not an option. Remaining there meant I would be a statue by sunrise. I started layering on every single piece of clothing in my wardrobe. Triple socks, double trousers, 4 tops, and my thickest parka. I yanked a beanie down low and grabbed gloves that I knew would not be enough. I cracked the door and stepped into the void. The wind slammed into me like a fist and the driving snow stole my sight immediately. Visibility was 0. The barn was only 50 yards out, but it felt like 50 miles across a frozen hellscape. I buried my chin in my collar and marched. Moving forward took everything I had. Drifts were waist-high, and the gusts kept trying to knock me sideways. The bits of skin leaving the coat felt like they were on fire before going completely dead. Each breath felt like swallowing glass. Just when I thought I was making progress, I went down hard. Maybe a root, maybe a buried tool. I will never know what caught my boot. 1 second I was upright, the next I was face-planted in the powder, the freeze wrapping around me. Forcing myself back up felt impossible. Every muscle screamed at me to just lie there and let it end. It was so tempting to just close my eyes. But I refused to quit. My mind drifted to Eleanor, weathering these storms alone for 40 years, never bending to the elements. I remembered her diary, the guidance she left behind for the next caretaker. She believed I could steward this place. I hauled myself up and plowed forward. By some miracle, my hand found the latch. I stumbled inside and crashed onto the straw. The birds made anxious little noises in the shadows lit only by the weak amber light of the warmer. It wasn't exactly tropical, but it cut the wind, and that was enough. I dragged myself over to the nesting area and curled up against the bales. Fire shot through my extremities as the blood started flowing again. Exhaustion was heavy on my eyelids. Then the glow of my cell caught my eye. It was still in my jacket, hanging on by a thread of battery life. Daniel's contact info was right there on the screen, the digits he had forced on me during his last aggressive visit. "When you wake up to reality," he had sneered, $50,000, freedom money, a ticket to a place where the air does not hurt your face. I let my gaze linger on his name for what felt like an eternity. I replayed the whole ordeal, the backbreaking labor, the solitude, the daily fight to stay breathing. I asked myself if any of this made sense. Is patch of dirt worth freezing for? My thumb hovered over the dial icon. The chill was still radiating through the timber. The blizzard was still howling its rage just inches away. Mist puffed from my lips with every breath. Even in this shelter, I knew one phone call and a quick autograph could end the suffering instantly. I almost pressed it, but then I glanced up. I saw the flock I had nurtured, the tools I had mastered, and the loft where I first cracked open Eleanor's life story. The hay still held the scent of a summer I remembered. At the rough timber my grandmother's hands had grazed 1,000 times before. This place was my sanctuary now. These 40 acres belonged to me. And not just because a deed declared it so, but because I'd paid for them in sweat. With every callus, every screaming muscle, every dawn broken and midnight burned. I had bled into this soil until it became a part of my own marrow. Slipping my phone into my pocket, I let the silence take over. Buried under a mountain of horse blankets, I huddled into the hay and prayed for sunrise. I made it through the night. That low point in this barn when my thumb hovered over Daniel's number was the absolute bottom. It's humbling to confess how close I came to throwing in the towel. Yet I believe those desperate hours serve a purpose. They teach us that true grit isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to put one foot in front of the other even when you're paralyzed with dread. Have you ever faced a moment like that? A time when quitting felt like the only logical choice, but some spark kept you moving. Share it with me. Your experience might be the lifeline someone else is searching for right now. The blizzard raged for another 2 days. When the skies finally cleared, the landscape had changed completely. A thick white blanket hid the world, softening every sharp angle into a rolling drift that glittered under the winter sun. It was breathtaking, beautiful enough to make you forget it had nearly killed you. I was still holed up in the barn when the rumble of an engine cut through the silence. At first, I dismissed it as a hallucination. 3 days of solitude can play tricks on the mind. But the roar got closer, followed by voices shouting my name. It was Earl and Harlan. They'd been trying to call, but the storm had wiped out what little signal existed out here. When the line stayed dead, their worry grew. The second the roads were passable, they loaded Earl's pickup with gear and headed my way. They found me shivering in the barn, half frozen, and huddled among the hens. "Lord have mercy, son!" Earl rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought you were a goner." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was tremble as they swaddled me in dry layers and hoisted me to my feet. They spent the next few hours putting my life back in order. Harlan swapped out a busted valve on the propane heater, while Earl dug a trench through the snow from the trailer to the barn door. They brought hot coffee rations and the warmth of human presence. "You frightened the life out of us," Mabel scolded when she pulled up a bit later. She squeezed me until my ribs protested. "Don't you ever pull a stunt like that again." "I didn't have options," I croaked. "I handled it. You always have options. You could have rung us up before the weather turned, asked for a hand." Her expression hardened. "That is the definition of community. We look out for our own. You aren't supposed to carry the world by yourself." She had a point. I'd been so obsessed with proving my independence that my stubborn pride nearly cost me everything. It was a lesson etched into my bones. The rest of the winter was brutal, but manageable. I let Earl check in on me, took the help when it was offered, and realized that seeking support wasn't a flaw. It was survival. Through the cold months, I continued reading Eleanor's diary, soaking up her wisdom and feeling her spirit nearby, though I hadn't uncovered all her secrets. The real discovery happened near the end of February. I was tidying up the barn, getting ready for the thaw, when my mind drifted to that little brass key I'd fished out of Eleanor's keepsake box. I'd been carrying the thing around for months with no idea what it unlocked. That afternoon, while shifting some old machinery, I spotted something new. A metal strongbox was jammed between 2 bales of hay shrouded in dust and spiderwebs. It had a keyhole tiny and precise that looked like the perfect mate for a small brass key. My hands trembled as I slid the metal in. It turned without resistance. The latch snapped open. Inside, I found a sheaf of documents and a sealed envelope with my name scrawled in Eleanor's distinctive script. I sank onto the floorboards, my heart hammering against my ribs, and tore open the seal. "My dearest Caleb." The letter started. "If you are reading these words, it means you've finally come home. It means you found the bravery to step up when nobody else would. It proves I was right to place my faith in you. There is so much to say and so little time left. So let me begin with the truth. You were loved, always. From your very first breath, you were the center of my heart. I tried so hard to be in your life. I wrote you constantly, called the house, and mailed a card for every single birthday. But your mother cut the lines. Every letter was returned to sender, every call blocked, every gift tossed aside. I can't explain why she did it. I don't know what sin I committed to earn such hatred from her, but I never quit trying. I never stopped praying that one day you'd find out the real story. I'm leaving this farm to you because it is my most treasured possession. Not for what it's worth in dollars, but for what it stands for. Our blood has been in this soil for 4 generations. I grew up on this land, raised my babies here, and laid your grandfather to rest beneath the great oak by the water. I want it in your hands because I know you'll respect what it means. I trust you will cherish it the way I did. But be warned, others will come for it. My own children have been waiting for my passing just to liquidate the property and split the cash. They see dollar signs, they don't see the legacy, they don't see the love. That is why I had these papers drawn up. Inside this box, you'll find the legal shield I prepared for you, a copy of my will notarized and safely lodged with a lawyer over in Missoula. Not the family attorney, mind you. Someone new. Someone with strict orders to track you down the moment anyone tries to meddle with your inheritance. There's also a letter of competency attached confirming this document is ironclad. I was sharp as a tack when I signed it. I had 3 witnesses, a notary, and filed every paper exactly by the Montana statute book. This land is yours. No one can take it from you. No one. God, I wish I could be there to watch you breathe life back into this soil. I wish I could sit on the porch with you and watch the day fade, just like I did with your grandfather. But even if I'm not there in the flesh, please listen to me. I am with you in every sunrise, in every apple that ripens in the orchard, and on every page of these journals. Stay strong, my sweet boy. Be brave and never forget that home isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you build with your own hands. With all my love, forever your grandmother, Eleanor. I placed the letter down and reached deep into the box. There was something else at the bottom. A thick stack of envelopes bound by a brittle rubber band. Letters, dozens of them, maybe 50 or more. Each one addressed to me in Eleanor's meticulous script. They were all mailed to my parents' house in Seattle, and every single one bore the same cruel red stamp. Return to sender. Address unknown. I scattered them across the barn floor, a lifetime of messages from a grandmother I never got to know. There were birthday cards for every single milestone. Christmas updates. Simple notes just saying, thinking of you, or hope you are well. She had written every month, sometimes every week. For 18 years she cast her love out into the void. And for 18 years my parents sent it right back unopened. I grabbed a birthday card at random. My 10th. Inside, Eleanor had written, "Happy birthday to my darling grandson. I hope this year is full of joy and new adventures. I wish I could be there to watch you blow out the candles. Just know that wherever you are, your grandma is thinking of you and loves you with all her heart." I never got it. Never knew she even tried. All those years feeling like nobody cared. All those birthdays where I felt completely invisible, clears throat. She was there the whole time, loving me from afar. She never quit on me. I gathered up every letter, every card. I promised myself I'd read every word eventually. But not right now. In that moment, all I could do was clutch them to my chest and weep for all the time that was stolen from us. Before I tell you how this ends, let's take a breath. Have you ever stumbled onto a truth that rewrote your entire history? Found out you were cherished when you were convinced you'd been abandoned? Does that kind of discovery break you or heal you? Maybe it does both. If you've got a story like that, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I believe every letter Eleanor wrote was an act of pure faith. Faith that love would eventually find its target, and it did. It just took the scenic route. Spring finally broke over Montana. The snow receded and the orchard exploded into white blossoms. The land that had nearly frozen me out became welcoming again. I scaled up the garden to a full acre. I added 6 more hens and 2 dairy goats I picked up from Virgil. Mabel even started teaching me how to make cheese. The second market season was a hit. I had fresh produce eggs chev and apple butter. My stall became a local favorite. Restaurants in the bigger towns even started placing wholesale orders. But I knew Daniel wasn't finished with me. He showed up in late March just as the last drifts of snow were melting away. This time he brought back up 2 lawyers in sharp suits lugging briefcases full of paperwork. I met them outside the trailer dressed in work clothes. I had dirt under my fingernails and Eleanor's letters in my hand. "Last chance," Daniel announced. He sounded confident, but his eyes snagged on the bundle I was holding. "Sign over your claim now, and I'll write you a check for $75,000. Final offer." I smiled. It was the first time I'd ever smiled at the man. "Actually, I have some reading material for your legal team." I handed them the packet from Eleanor's box, the notarized will, the letter from her attorney Sarah Chen in Missoula, and the proof that everything was locked down legal and ironclad. I watched their faces as they read. The arrogance drained away, replaced by confusion, then worry, and finally something that looked a lot like panic. One of the suits pulled Daniel aside. They whispered urgently. I couldn't catch the words, but I watched Daniel's face turn a deep shade of crimson. Finally, he spun back around. "This changes nothing," he spat, though the bite was gone from his voice. "I'll fight this. I'll find a loophole." "You'll lose," I said calmly. "You'll bleed money on legal fees, and you will still lose. My grandmother was smarter than you, Daniel. She saw you coming a mile away." He just stared at me. Then, without a word, he marched toward his car. The lawyers trailed behind him, clutching their useless documents. At the door, he paused. "Your parents were right about you. Stubborn, just like that old woman?" "Thank you," I replied. "That's the best compliment anyone has ever given me." He climbed into the car, but before he slammed the door, he looked at me one last time. "Your parents turned this farm down, you know, more than once. The rest of the family loathed this land. They called Eleanor insane for bequeathing it to me rather than cashing out and dividing the spoils." "I'm aware," I whispered. Her final letter made that clear. "And you're still doing this even knowing your own kin think you've lost your mind." My gaze drifted over the 40 acres that now bore my name. I stared at the barn where I had weathered the freezing months. The fruit trees on the verge of blossoming. The soil waiting for seed. the ghostly outline of the cabin I was already constructing in my head. "You're seeing dirt, Daniel. I'm seeing my grandmother's heart given form. Every sapling she bedded down, every post she drove, every morning she greeted from a porch that no longer exists. She bled into this soil, and she believed I was the one to keep it breathing." I locked eyes with him. "So, yeah, I'm keeping it. I'll never stop wanting it, and I'll spend my days proving she was right to bet on me." Daniel just gave a slow, pitying shake of his head. He shut the car door, drove off, and that was the last I ever saw of him. 3 years have gone by since then. You wouldn't even know this place if you walked onto the property today. The scorched scar of the old foundation is gone. In its place stands a sturdy cabin with a green tin roof and a deck looking west chasing the dusk. I raised it with my own hands, backed by Heron Earl and a dozen generous souls who brought their gear and their wisdom. Just a single bedroom and bath and a kitchen flooded with early morning sun. It is modest, sure, but it belongs to me. We transformed the old trailer into a roadside shop coated in barn-red paint stocked with goods bearing the Henderson Heritage Farm name. Jars of apple butter, dehydrated fruit, crisp pickles, jams, farm-fresh eggs, winter veggies, chèvre, and handmade soaps. The statistics might bore a stranger. 30 hens where once there were only 4. 5 acres of cultivated beds reclaiming the wild grass. A gaggle of heritage turkeys. 12 goats. An orchard that gifted us over 1,000 pounds of fruit this past autumn. Back in that first bitter winter, I began typing out my story online mostly to keep the crushing solitude at bay. I didn't think a soul would care, but they found me. Thousands of them. Folks trapped in existences that felt like ill-fitting shoes. Dreamers looking for a reset button. People hungry for proof that escape was possible. Eventually, they started writing back. A trickle at first, then a flood I couldn't keep up with. That is how Jessamine entered the picture. She sent a message during the spring of year 2. She was 25, suffocating in a Denver high-rise corporate gig that was slowly killing her spirit. Desperate for a shift, she asked to visit for a week to study sustainable agriculture. That week turned into a month, then another. The talk of leaving eventually stopped altogether. We haven't tied the knot yet, though we will. When you are constructing a future meant to endure, you don't need to sprint. This past Saturday marked our very first teaching workshop. 12 students traveled from places as distant as California and Florida, paying to immerse themselves in homesteading for the weekend. They bunked in the hayloft we had renovated into sleeping quarters. They got their hands dirty right beside us in the soil. They asked me things I never imagined I'd be knowledgeable enough to answer. On the final night, we all congregated on the deck to see the day out. The horizon ignited with those unbelievable hues Eleanor described in her diaries, pinks, oranges, and golds melting into one another. The very same view she admired for 60 years. The same one her ancestors witnessed before her. Jessamine nudged me to read aloud from Eleanor's book. I flipped to the entry that had sustained me through the bleakest hours. "If my kin ever return to this soil, I pray they see what I see. Not the toil or the loneliness, but the liberty, the tether to something genuine and firm. The opportunity to craft an existence with your own 2 hands. This earth has granted me everything. And if I could bestow one gift upon my grandbabies, it would be the bravery to walk a different road." When I closed the book, the group sat in heavy silence, some wiping their eyes. A woman, roughly my mother's age, approached and gripped my hands. "Thank you for letting us know her," she said, "and for showing us that restarts are always possible." Eleanor crosses my mind daily. The woman who loved me from afar, the one who laid the groundwork for my arrival long before I knew I was on my way, who bet everything on me when the world looked away. I visit her resting place, often a modest marker beside my grandfather beneath the ancient oak near the stream. I update her on the land, the livestock, the gardens, the preserves that sell out instantly, and the life Jessamine and I are weaving together. I like to imagine she is listening, that somewhere in some way she understands her trust was well placed. My parents never rang, not when a glossy magazine profiled the farm, not when the local news ran a segment on the young guy rescuing the Henderson legacy, not even when I mailed them a letter laying it all out. I have no idea if they carry any guilt. I don't know if I ever crossed their minds, but I've learned that waiting for people to change into who you need them to be is a waste of time. You construct a life with the people who actually stand beside you. The Earls, the Mabels, the Harlans, and the Virgils, the strangers who morph into family simply because they decided to stay. I arrived on this dirt with $300 to my name and a spirit that had been completely shattered. What I discovered was 40 acres of overgrown wilderness and the enduring warmth of a grandmother reaching out from the past. What stands here was not just raised with timber and steel, it was forged from sheer grit, stubborn resilience, and the grace of strangers who saw a light in me when mine had gone dark. As I rest here on the porch steps, with Jessamine close by and the Montana horizon burning into twilight, the truth of Eleanor's message finally settles in my chest. Rock bottom is just the solid ground you need to push off from. A home is not something you stumble across. It is something you have to craft with your own hands. My chapter closes here, but perhaps this serves as the prologue to your own adventure. If this journey resonated with you, please hit subscribe and pass this along to a soul who might be desperate for a sign. Maybe someone feeling trapped, terrified, or convinced that starting fresh is a myth. Drop a line below. Share your vision. Let me know what foundations you are laying. Speak to the bravery you muster just to face the morning. I read every single note, and I promise your struggle counts for more than you can imagine. I appreciate you taking this long walk with me. Thank you for backing a simple Montana kid who began with zero and ended up with a whole world. Never forget, no matter your location or the mountain you are climbing, Eleanor's wisdom belongs to you as well. You have the capacity to grow beauty from dust if you just have the will to start. Now, go make something incredible. I will catch you further down the path.